Welcome to my second installment of Donald Trump's Virtual Ancestors. If you haven't already, be sure to check out my comparison of Trump with Kaiser Wilhelm II. Now I'm going to match him up with another European upstart. On December 2nd, 1851, Charles Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, nephew of the deceased Napoleon Bonaparte, declared himself Emperor of France. He'd been after that job for a while. Louis Napoleon, as he was often called, made his first attempt to take over France by coup d'etat in 1836, and like all ambitious men, he did not suffer from excessive amounts of modesty.
I believe that from time to time men are created whom I call volunteers of Providence,
Louis Napoleon proclaimed,
in whose hands are placed the destiny of their countries. I believe I am one of those men. If I am wrong, I can perish uselessly. If I am right, then Providence will put me into a position to fulfill my mission.
Well, it didn't work out the way he planned. Louis Napoleon somehow got it into his head that he could march on Paris the way his uncle had back in 1815 when Napoleon Bonaparte dramatically returned from exile. But strangely, Louis Napoleon and his small army of followers instead descended on Strasbourg, which is somewhat of a distance from Paris, especially back then. Anyway, arriving in full military regalia, he and his followers called on the locals to revolt against King Louis Philippe, and they then charged into a dead-end street and were immediately arrested, and Louis Napoleon was banished from France. So he fled to the United States and then to London, where he lived among the rich for a while and had affairs, the usual stuff. Then he decided that he would try another coup in 1840. This time, Louis Napoleon and about 60 guys attempted a beach invasion, which was stopped even faster than the first uprising. One newspaper commented on overthrow attempt number 2.
This surpasses comedy. One doesn't kill crazy people, one locks them up.
And that's what the authorities did. Louis was condemned to life in prison, where he told whoever would listen, his guards, his cellmates, his visitors, that he was born to lead France. He even wrote a pamphlet called The Extinction of Pauperism. Somehow in 1846, he put on a disguise and escaped his cell and fled back to London. And he waited, and then his moment came. In 1848, France overthrew the monarchy of Louis Philippe and established the Second Republic, which set up a presidency and universal male suffrage. So Louis Napoleon went back home and declared himself the savior of France once again and ran for president. And now, somehow, everybody saw something in him to like. The peasants were angry about inflation, so he said he'd do something about inflation. The Catholics were concerned about religion and social stability, so he said he believed in religion, family, property, the eternal basis of all social order. The workers were worried about unemployment, so he promised to, quote, give work to those unoccupied. Even prominent leftist intellectuals like Victor Hugo supported him, and of course he was Napoleon's nephew, so there was that. Astonishingly, he won the presidency in the new elections by a margin of almost 75% of the vote. Once ensconced in power, Louis Napoleon set upon addressing what he saw as the nation's most important problem, changing the French Constitution so he could serve for more than one term. When he could not accomplish that, he launched coup number 3, and since now he was in charge of the army, this one succeeded. Then he declared himself emperor, aka Napoleon III, a title he kept for almost 2 decades. Karl Marx was living in London at the time, and he was shocked as anyone else at all this. In response, he wrote one of his most famous essays, The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. According to the revolutionary calendar of the French Revolution, the 18th of Brumaire was November 9th, 1799, the date when Napoleon first canceled the government and declared himself first consul, then Emperor of France. So here was an ironic title in the service of answering an obvious question: how did this kook wind up in charge of France? And Marx began his essay noting that the philosopher Hegel once said that great historic moments appear twice. Marx then added, the first time as tragedy, the second time as farce. In 1848, in his Communist Manifesto, Marx seemed to offer hope that through the impending democratic revolutions of Europe, the working class could replace capitalism with something else. Now he despaired as he wrote,
Universal suffrage seems to have survived for only a moment, in order that with its own hand it may make its last will and testament before the eyes of all the world.
As for Napoleon 3.0, he quickly arrested over 25,000 people who actively opposed his coup. Even his former supporter Victor Hugo fled the country to escape his wrath. Once that matter was settled, Napoleon III gave renewed power to the Catholic Church. His Minister of Education abolished history and philosophy programs, required high school students to be tested for their religious knowledge, and starved laboratory scientists of funding. It should be acknowledged that Napoleon III did some good things. His agricultural reforms ended famines in France. He did legalize unions. But he also hired a man named George Haussmann to completely renovate Paris, widening its narrowed streets to make it more difficult for urban workers and radicals to revolt against the government by using barricades to block the police. He took over Vietnam. He tried to take over Mexico and failed. Some of Napoleon III's measures were popular, others weren't. But eventually he led his country into a war with Prussia, in which the armies of what would soon become Germany clobbered the French military, carpet-bombed Paris, and captured Napoleon III as a prisoner of war, upon which he abdicated his position, thus completing his career as the first president, second emperor, and last monarch of France. He died in England in 1873.